Have you ever found yourself standing at the edge of something beautiful, something meaningful, hesitating because it didn't feel quite right yet? Maybe you wanted to start a business, but your idea wasn't polished enough. Or you wanted to write that book, but your first draft wouldn't read like what you imagined in your head. Perhaps you wanted to begin a fitness journey or learn a new language, and every time you tried, something felt off. The timing wasn't right, the conditions weren't ideal, you needed one more resource, one more piece of information before you could truly begin. Here's what I want you to understand deeply today. That hesitation is not wisdom. That waiting for perfect conditions is actually a form of self-sabotage disguised as patience. And the most beautiful truth about life is this: small beginnings are sacred. Not just acceptable, but holy in their own right. Because when you begin imperfectly, something extraordinary happens. You step into a space that perfection could never enter. We live in a world obsessed with results, with outcomes, with the polished final product we see on social media or in business magazines. But behind every single one of those perfect images is a messy, chaotic, uncertain beginning. A first draft that made no sense. A prototype that looked like garbage. A version that was deeply flawed but desperately needed to exist. The lie we've been told is that success follows preparation, that if you prepare enough, plan perfectly, wait for the right moment, then everything will fall into place and your beginning will be seamless and effortless. But this myth has cost us more than we realize. It's kept thousands of incredible ideas buried in our minds. It stopped brilliant artists from sharing their first attempts with the world. It's made us feel ashamed of starting things before they're ready, when actually nothing is ever truly ready. Think about it. When was the last time you saw someone share a perfect beginning? When did anyone really start something and have it come out exactly as intended on the first try? The answer is never. Not once in all of human history has anything beautiful emerged fully formed from the moment of its creation. Every masterwork began as an imperfect attempt. Every revolution started as a small, uncertain spark. The Japanese have a concept called wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, the acknowledgement that nothing is ever finished or perfect, and that there's something deeply beautiful about things that are incomplete. This isn't just aesthetic philosophy. It's wisdom for how we live our lives. When you embrace your imperfect beginnings, you're not settling for less. You're participating in one of life's most sacred processes. Here's something I want you to hold on to. Small beginnings have a power that perfection never could possess because they create momentum. Perfection is static. It demands everything be ready before anything can happen, and so nothing ever does. But a small beginning moves. It breathes. It learns. It grows. When you write one page instead of waiting for the perfect book, something remarkable happens. You've created actual content in the world. When you make one phone call to start that conversation, something shifts. You've opened a door that was closed before. When you take one step toward health without waiting until you have all the information, your body responds differently than it would if you stayed exactly where you are. The magic is in the doing itself. Not the perfect doing, just the doing. Because action creates clarity. Action generates insight. Action reveals what was hidden from view when you were standing still and planning. You cannot see the path ahead until you take at least one step onto it. This isn't just metaphor. It's how learning actually works in our brains, how creativity flows through us, how transformation happens in our lives. Let me ask you something honest and direct. What if the fear of imperfection is really the fear of being seen? What if we'd rather stay stuck than risk looking foolish trying something new? That's a real thing, isn't it? We've been conditioned to believe that competence means having no flaws, that worth comes from flawlessness. And so we hide behind preparation and planning and waiting because these give us the illusion of control without the vulnerability of actual effort. But here's what courage looks like. Writing that first awkward paragraph. Sending that email before you've edited it twice. Showing up to practice even though your technique isn't perfect yet. Making a decision when all the information isn't available. These are acts of faith, and they're sacred precisely because they require us to trust something beyond our own certainty. When you start imperfectly, you're telling yourself, actually, no, you're showing the universe that you're willing to be in process. That you understand growth happens in the middle, not at the destination. That you have faith that small steps compound into significant results. This is spiritual wisdom dressed up as practical advice. Think about some of the people you admire most. The artists, entrepreneurs, leaders who've created something meaningful in this world. If you could go back to their very first attempt at what they eventually mastered, would you recognize them? Would you feel inspired by that early version? Probably not. And yet, if they hadn't started imperfectly, none of the later success would exist. J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter wasn't born complete in her mind. It grew through countless drafts and revisions. Steve Jobs' first computer was a prototype made in his garage with parts he ordered on credit. The Beatles played thousands of gigs before anyone had heard their name. Each one of them started with something that would have been embarrassing if they tried to show it as the finished product. But they understood what we often forget. Beginnings are supposed to be small, uncertain, and imperfect because that's where life actually happens. So how do you live this truth? How do you stop waiting for perfect conditions and start embracing your sacred small beginnings? Here's something simple but profound. When you want to begin something meaningful, give yourself permission to do the smallest possible version first. Write one sentence instead of a paragraph. Make one phone call instead of planning 5 conversations. Start one workout session without having all the equipment or knowledge yet. The key is not the size of the beginning, it's that it exists. Something real in the world versus something imaginary in your head. Because once you've begun, you can improve. Once you've started, you can refine. But if you're still planning, perfecting, and waiting for conditions to align, there's nothing yet to build upon. I want you to think about what small thing you could do today that would be imperfect but meaningful. What's one tiny step towards something that matters to you? Maybe it's sending a message to someone who inspired you. Maybe it's trying a recipe you've never cooked before even though your knife skills aren't great yet. Maybe it's booking the appointment or enrolling in the class without having all the answers about what comes next. There is something deeply sacred about being in process. About allowing yourself to grow rather than trying to arrive. When you embrace small beginnings, you're actually embracing your own becoming, not just whatever you're building or creating, but who you're becoming through the attempt itself. You become someone who takes action, someone who trusts herself enough to start before she's ready, someone who values progress over perfection. The people who change their lives are not necessarily more talented than everyone else. They're usually just willing to begin imperfectly when others wait for perfect conditions. And that willingness creates everything, the skills, the confidence, the opportunities, the relationships, that eventually leads to what we call success. But it all starts with a small beginning, and I mean that literally, not a big plan, not a detailed strategy, but one small step taken today. So here's my invitation to you today. Stop waiting for perfect conditions because they will never come. Stop apologizing for starting imperfectly because there's nothing wrong with beginning as yourself, imperfect and uncertain and beautifully in process. Your imperfect beginnings are not signs that something is wrong. They're proof that something beautiful is possible. Take one small step toward what matters to you today. Make it small enough that even if it fails, you'll still be proud of having tried. But also make it meaningful enough that you know it's worth the attempt. And then watch what happens, because when you begin imperfectly, life responds in ways that perfection never could. Something moves forward. Something begins to grow. Something sacred starts to unfold. You have permission to start small. You have permission to be uncertain. You have permission to trust yourself enough to take one imperfect step today. And I believe with everything in me that when you do, something beautiful will begin. Not because it's perfect, but precisely because it isn't.